what I wanted to do was put together this 15 reasons why you shouldn't get into bluebirding. And this is not to discourage you. I would absolutely love for you to get into bluebirds, but I need you to know all of what goes into it, because bluebirding is not for the faint of heart. And another big thing about bluebirds is it's a conservation effort here in the United States, and I think all of North America, really. It's not just bluebirds, that's sort of the gateway bird, but along with it is other cavity nesting birds like tree swallows, chickadees. I won't say purple martins, they're on a whole other level. They are cavity birds, but they require even more care than bluebirds and tree swallows and chickadees and titmice and house wrens. So I wanted to put this together so you have full understanding. And the reason this is so important is because there is a lot of heartbreak involved. And if you're going to do this, you have to understand the responsibility that is also involved. One of the big things that happens is that we have good intentions. We start out wanting to do something really positive, but without proper education or a full commitment, our good intentions can sometimes have negative consequences, and this is actually the case when it comes to bluebirds and chickadees and tree swallows and everything like that. So this is why this information is so important. So number one, and this is progressive, so stay with me the whole time, because the last reason is probably the biggest reason. And if you can handle it all the way through, or you think you can get to a point where you can handle it, then bluebirding is definitely for you. But reason number one is maybe you live in a more urban environment, or you have a house sparrow infestation. House sparrows and European starlings are not native to North America, and they regularly kill our native songbirds. Mostly this is our cavity nesting birds like bluebirds and tree swallows, but they have also been known to attack finches and robins too, which is so surprising, but they do. So if you live in that kind of environment, you would have to manage the house sparrow population first and basically get rid of the population. And that's harder to do in a more congested area. The other thing is house sparrows and starlings kind of really prefer commercial areas because food is easy to come by in that situation. Even if you don't have a house sparrow infestation, an urban area is going to be harder to manage just because there's more environmental pressures happening. There's more predators in a confined space, less food resources for predators. There's also a lot of noise from traffic and things like that. So it's not that it can't be done, it's just, it's a lot more work than if you're in a residential area, or if you were working with maybe a church with a plot of land or something like that, and you were putting a nest box there. Reason number two is the bugs. And bugs and birds go hand in hand, and they're so vital. But if you have bee allergies and are really concerned about that, that's something to keep in mind, because if you're checking nest boxes, sometimes what happens is a wasp builds a nest in the nest box, and that's not a good thing, and it has to be removed. Mosquitoes, I am a big mosquito bait treat. I don't know, they love me. So I have my citronella candle burning right now. I have my mosquito bracelets on. But if you're into bluebirding, that is something that you're going to be exposed to, you know, when you're working on cleaning the nest boxes out, or you're doing monitoring and stuff. You could become a mosquito magnet. The other thing too is pesticides. If you're getting into bluebirding, you don't want to spray pesticides in your yard or anything like that, because they're not selective. So even if you're getting a mosquito fog or something and they say, oh, it's not toxic, don't worry, it's not selective either. So it's killing all of the larvae, and that is your bluebird's food supply. And maybe you're supplementing with live mealworms and stuff, but that's not the most nutritious. They need other bugs too. It helps kind of round out their diet better, and they prefer that, you know. They're like, who wants the same thing every single day when you can have so much? So that's another thing to think about, is you really don't want to be using pesticides if you are hosting bluebirds. The next thing, and it's not really a reason not to get into bluebirding, but it is something to consider, is that you have to be somewhat handy with tools. At least be able to use a screwdriver. That's probably, so if you can do that, you know, then and a lot of people can. So it's like I said, this is progressive, so we're starting kind of at the bottom here. But there's things that you're going to need to modify with the box, and unscrewing and, screwing in holes, like maybe to mount a camera inside the nest box or something like that is going to be important. It'd be great if you can use a drill. So you also need access to these kind of things. And that's really easy. A screwdriver is really easy to come by, and a drill or a screw gun or whatever. Those are easy to come by, but you also have to be confident and comfortable using those things. What does happen, and this is an issue for me, is that I am not handy when it comes to the big woodworking stuff. So your saws and, I don't know, drill presses and things like that. I am not good with that stuff. My husband has to do it, so I have to go beg for his help, and he's good about that. He really does. But that is something also to consider, because maybe down the road you want to significantly modify the box or add some shielding from the sun, or do something that would require more woodworking. At least have a friend who can do some of these things for you if you're not comfortable doing it, or learn. Next reason not to get into bluebirding is your neighbors. So let's say your neighbor is already hosting bluebirds and they're backed up right to your backyard. The thing about it is bluebirds are very territorial, and they require at least 300 to 350 feet of space between nest boxes, and that's to prevent fighting and stress. There's some wiggle room in that. If you have a yard where the sight lines are blocked, sometimes that helps reduce the stress. But the big thing there is, if your neighbors are doing it, you may not have as much success putting up a box, or it could lead to fights, or your neighbors might get upset that you're taking their bluebirds away, even though they don't own them. But I can understand, that you're invested in these birds for years and years, and suddenly they're going elsewhere, and it's really hard. The thing is, though, the great news is that you can still put up a bluebird box and try to host another type of species. So say your neighbor regularly has bluebirds. You can still put up a box and host tree swallows, or you could put up a box with a hole reducer, a 1 1/8 hole reducer, and host house wrens and chickadees. So you're not totally excluded from this if your neighbors are doing it. You just maybe think of a different bird. The next reason is that it's a good idea, if you want to host bluebirds, to give up feeding bird seed during the nesting season. And the thing about feeding bird seed during the spring and summer months is that it's really not necessary. A lot of times this is just for our backyard bird watching pleasure, but it's not necessary for the birds. They don't need the seed like they do in the winter time. So the reason, though, you want to give up seed feeding is because it invites other predators. It invites other birds that might bring stress onto your nesting birds. And it's not just your bluebird box that's a nest. There are probably more nests in your yard than you realize, especially if you have a yard with a lot of plant life. So that is something to think about. But the great thing is you can still plant plants like you see behind me, not the butterfly bush. That's a terrible plant. My husband loves it. But the cutleaf coneflower and the milkweed that's behind me, and those bring other birds around too, and that makes really good pictures. The next reason is physical limitations. Bluebirding demands some physical elements. So one of the things is that you at least need your box to be at about 5 feet off the ground. And sometimes they end up higher. My boxes are higher, and that requires me to get on a step ladder. If I need to put a sparrow spooker up, that makes me have to reach even higher. So if you're in a situation where getting on a ladder is something you just can't do anymore, or you don't want to risk it, it's something to think about. Again, you can still mount the box a little bit lower, but sometimes attaching other things on top of it can be a difficult reach. The next thing is, if you are a bit of a control freak, and nothing wrong with that, I am a bit of a control freak, big time control freak. But if this is you, then bluebirding is going to be really hard, because there's a lot that you're going to want to control. There's a lot you want to do in order to protect your birds and keep them safe. There's a lot of threats that are involved. And the thing is, you can't control everything. And it can be so maddening and so stressful during the nesting season if that's who you are. And the thing is too, it's the first year, usually the first and probably the second year of bluebirding, where this is more challenging. As you get more into it, you start to relax, you start to trust your birds a little more, you kind of know what you're capable of too, and that right there is really helpful. So when you become more confident in what you're doing, you can kind of relax. But it is something to consider, again, if you are thinking about getting into bluebirding, is that if you are very controlling, you just have to accept the fact that you can't control everything as much as you want to, and you don't want to drive yourself insane. The next thing on my list here is that you can't hate certain birds. And this may seem like a really ridiculous thing to say, oh, I love all birds. But birds are violent to other birds sometimes. Nature is brutal. It's not all happy at the bird feeders all the time. It's really intense. And one of the things that happens is a house wren is very famous for going into bluebird boxes when they have the eggs down, or maybe even just little baby hatchlings, and they'll poke holes in the eggs and throw them out of the nest box. There's ways to manage the peace, there's ways to prevent this from happening, but if you got into bluebirding and suddenly you discover this happen, and you saw the eggs, you've been monitoring, you're really excited, and now everything's trashed basically, and the house wren's now building a nest, it can start to fuel some hate towards the house wren, and we don't want to go there because it's a very slippery slope. Another big example is house sparrows and starlings. I've mentioned them before. If you follow my channel at all, then you kind of know that I stand against them as far as them being in the United States or in North America, because they are invasive and they do cause ecological harm in North America. But I also choose, and that's really important, I choose not to hate these birds on a regular basis. I understand that over in the countries that they are native in, they have a role in their ecosystems. It's a responsibility for me as a conservationist and a bluebird lover and everything, to reduce the populations in North America. That is very important, to discourage them, not encourage them to proliferate. But that doesn't mean that I hate them. In fact, the work that is being done to manage those populations, it's hard. It's hard emotionally to do the things that need to be done, and I'll get into that more. But I don't hate them, and part of that, again, is a choice. It's a choice to discipline my feelings when something bad happens, and step back and remember that these are birds, and they're just acting out of nature, and they're trying to survive too. So that is something that when you get into bluebirding, to be prepared for, is that the birds can be ruthless with each other, and you are the steward of your backyard. The next thing is unexpected surprises, and I can warn you about a few things, but the point is that they're unexpected surprises that happens. So some examples would be you start with a bluebird box, you open the door one day to check them and see that they're doing okay, because monitoring is very important for the conservation effort. And you open the box and there's a snake inside, a big black rat snake inside the nest box. And if you are not prepared for that, which I don't think anybody ever is, just I'm opening the box. It's one of those things that can be quite startling. And if you're not a snake person at all, and pair that with a ladder too. If you're on any kind of step ladder and you're easily startled, that's something to think about. Another thing that can happen is you open the nest box and there's a wasp inside, or you're maybe needing to pull the stovepipe baffle off of the pole and there's a wasp nest inside, or you're in a rural area and there's fire ants that you walk into, or there are yellow jackets. So there are all these things that can happen that will take you by surprise. And again, I can only name a few, but there are all the other variables that we still have yet to know. The key is always being aware of your surroundings too when you're doing this, and being prepared for something like that. And if that's not your cup of tea, that is something to think about if you were thinking about hosting bluebirds. All right, the next big thing is money. This will rob you. It is not a good idea to go on Amazon and just find any old nest box, put it up. Even just the ones that say built according to North American Bluebird Society, those are pretty good boxes, standard, but they don't always fit the bill. And usually the more expensive boxes are important. Never buy a decorative birdhouse either. Do not use decorative birdhouses for any bird in North America. They are not good for hosting any cavity nesting birds, and cavity nesting birds need our support. But to do this, you've got to do it right, and that's going to cost money. And so it's not just buying a nest box and mounting it to a tree or a fence post where it will become a predator lunch box. It's buying a pole, buying a stovepipe baffle, buying a good nest box, and setting that up. And you just cannot cheap out on it. And I want you to really think about this too, is that if you are wanting to host them, you are supposed to host them, and you are taking on that responsibility. And so there comes an obligation to really care for the bluebirds and see it through and do it the right way. On the note of money, the next one is that bluebirding is a gateway to hosting other birds. And what will happen is you will not just host bluebirds, you will end up putting nest boxes all over, because there's all this competition, and in order to manage competition, you need separate boxes available for different species. So you put up vacant boxes. One of my best practices that I have is always have at least one vacant box available on your property, and as soon as that's taken by a native bird, you put up another vacant box. And I would recommend that if it becomes occupied, that's when you get a stovepipe baffle, and always mounted on a pole. The one that you see behind me over there, that one is a test box. I was sent that to test it out, and so I put it on a pole. It didn't quite meet my standards, but that's another vacant box that's out there. So it's going to introduce you to a world of new birds, and that's wonderful, and it's great to protect them, but it's also going to take a toll on your wallet too. So it's something to be mindful about, is that the birds are going to obligate you to spend more money on them. The next thing is, for a lot of people, bluebirding will make you worry a lot, especially your first and maybe your second, definitely your second year into bluebirding. You're going to worry a lot. Your first year, you're setting things up and you're trying to learn and everything. Your second year, you kind of know what can go wrong, and now you're even more worried about the what can go wrong. The worry does dissipate over the years, but I've known some people who've been doing it for years and years, and the nesting season is still just a really stressful time. Another thing is that there is so much heartbreak. I keep saying that, but there really is so much heartbreak involved, and that kind of heartbreak can accumulate. And so it might not be your first, second, third, fourth year into bluebirding, but it might be your 10th year where you just can't take it anymore. And it's so hard to give up, because you know that these birds depend on you year after year, but at the same time, it takes an emotional toll on you sometimes. And so I do want you to think about yourself first and your well-being first. And if you get into bluebirding and you need to quit. And if you think that you can't handle the stress of bluebirding, don't. On the lines of stress, bluebirding is going to make you afraid to take vacation, at least again in your first, second, maybe even your third year. You are going to be nervous when you take vacations. And it's not just because things can happen while you're gone, but it's also there's a schedule involved. And so let's say you have house wrens in your yard and you put up a wren guard, which I have a video about that, by the way, if you're not sure what the heck I'm talking about. But you put up a wren guard and it's close to time for the birds to fledge. Well, if you're out on vacation, you can't take that down. So what you can do is arrange for neighbors and or like a pet sitter or something like that to help you out. But it does make it stressful. The next reason, and we're second from the last here, and I kind of keep hinting at this, but bluebirding is full of heartbreak. Predation, that happens, competition where maybe nestlings die, maybe you have a box that leaked and the babies died because they got wet, cold, and there was no intervention. There's a lot that can happen and a lot that can go wrong, and it's not just heartbreaking. What can happen too is that you will sometimes feel like this is your fault. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. I won't sugarcoat it. Sometimes you make a mistake. Everybody will make mistakes. I've made mistakes. And that's going to be hard on yourself. But you live, you learn. You don't make those mistakes again. But it is hard. And you need to be prepared for that, because, if you haven't done this before, it's probably hard to really imagine. But you do get so invested in these nests and so excited because you watch these. And even though they're wild birds, in some ways you feel bonded and connected to them. And when things go wrong, it's just so disappointing because you wanted to see it all the way through and now you can't. And that's really hard. So the final reason, this is number 15, the big reason here, and I'm going to say this dramatically, is if you cannot kill a bird, do not get into bluebirding. I'll say it differently. If you don't think you can kill a bird, or get the courage to kill a bird, don't get into bluebirding. And I say it this extreme because I want you to be prepared for this aspect. What I'm talking about is house sparrows and starlings, which I've mentioned all throughout this video. They are invasive and they are a direct threat to your bluebirds, to your chickadees, to your tree swallows, to pretty much any native songbird, smaller songbirds. For starlings, they will kill woodpeckers. But if you are doing this, then there is an obligation for conservation involved. And that also means that you cannot let house sparrows and starlings proliferate. You can't let them repopulate. You can't let them successfully nest. So the other thing is that if they're on your property, they become a threat to your bluebird, and it's sometimes it's just a matter of time. There are tactics you can use to discourage, like sparrow spookers. I always pair that with wren guards too, and then using a decoy box. But those discouragement tactics only buy time, and the real way to protect your bluebirds is when one comes on the property, have a decoy box available, set a trap, and trap the bird. It's always a live trap, and I have so many resources on trapping and managing house sparrows and starlings. You do want to monitor and everything and do it safely. So after you've trapped them, you would have to euthanize, and I have videos about that. Or sometimes you can't even trap them. Sometimes you have to use a pellet you know what. I don't know if I can say that on YouTube anymore, but you have to be able to take some kind of action. And if you feel like you could never do this, I would really not get into bluebirding. Or what can happen sometimes, I call it the sacrificial bluebird. You'll get into bluebirding anyway, you'll give it a try, and a house sparrow will kill your bluebird, and then you'll get the courage. That usually is what drives the courage. And I don't want that to be rooted in hate either, but just be sad, grieve, and then know that there's a responsibility at play when you're doing something like this. If even after that you still can't do this, there are ways around it. You could try to connect with a local falconer or raptor rehabber and give them the live birds if they'll take them. Not everybody takes them, but I do work with a falconer. And the beautiful thing about that is that they're doing a conservation effort too. And catching the sparrows is a conservation effort. So it's 2 or 3-fold, you know, we're helping the bluebirds, we're reducing the population of invasive birds, and we're feeding the raptors that are also being conserved. So that's really important. You may have the feeling of like, well, you know, I just, because of what I believe, I can't take a life. And I understand that, I really do. I kind of felt the same way, and I feel a lot of guilt sometimes doing this. And I would say that instead of thinking about it as taking a life, think about it as you are a steward and you are managing life. And you're making these decisions, and it's a very powerful responsibility, and that power is kind of scary too. So you definitely don't want to be trivial about this. You do want to feel a sense of, I suppose, guilt or heaviness, because I think that keeps you sensitive to the situation. The other thing is, if you don't take it, the bird will. And it's a brutal attack. I have a video of a Eurasian tree sparrow attacking a bluebird, and this one is, a Eurasian tree sparrow is closely related to a house sparrow, and they're only in isolated areas of the US. But what they do is, both starlings and sparrows will trap a bird in the box. And they are just so much more powerful than our native birds, and they will hold them down and peck and peck and peck and peck and bite and peck and peck. And just, it's so repeated until the bird dies, and that's how it happens. So you can let the bird do it, or you can do it and do it quickly and painlessly, and that might be the better way. So again, you're not just taking life, you're managing life. I have a lot of resources too, especially with the sparrow management. There is one video that shows some of the aftermath of these attacks, and it shares my own story where even a bluebird had to be euthanized because the injuries were so severe that it couldn't go out. So both the house sparrow and the bluebird had to be euthanized. Everybody died. That's not good either. So if you are thinking, well, maybe I could, sometimes videos like that, sometimes just seeing these things will be more motivating and get you kind of more courageous. And I will say the first time is the hardest. It really is. So in the end, these are really important things to consider when you are getting into bluebirding, or if you're thinking about getting into bluebirding, and you have to see it through. You have to be a good manager, because as you're kind of seeing, there is a lot that can go wrong, and there's a lot that we can do that if we don't do it right can make it go wrong quicker or make it go wrong less. That sounds stupid, but reduce the risk of things going wrong. In the end, though, it is so rewarding. It is so rewarding to know that you are having a really positive impact on your local ecosystem. When you have a flock of bluebirds come visit you in the winter, and well, you kind of helped do that. That's a really awesome thing, and it is so fulfilling. So I don't want to discourage you from getting into bluebirding. I just want you to know what all is involved, so you're prepared, and also know whether or not you're willing to take on that responsibility, because it does require probably a lot more care than you realize. Hey, just really quick, I want to take a moment and pin this to the video in order to, yes, plug this educational coloring book. I have spent a year working on doing the illustrations, writing up all the information, but this book is all about caring for and hosting bluebirds, and it's pretty comprehensive too. I've set it up so you can color on one page and read about the topic on the other page. And the hope with this is that you could just relax, color, enjoy it, and then engage with the information too. You can find it on Amazon, and I'll also have a link to it in this video's description.